Hey there, guys. Welcome back to another episode. How are you guys doing out there? Warren here. You guys had a favorite game when you were a kid? Yeah, me too. And one of mine was red light, green light. And some would argue that it was that way because we were boys and we were ultra competitive. But that given, I don't think that in and of itself is all that there is or was about that. And the reason I bring it up is because too often we're just stuck in one part of the game, and that is the green light part, never the red light. And I started discovering that, as a kid, and here's the fun thing, when you're playing the game on green light, you would just go hard, right? And on red light, I found red light pretty boring because on red light, all that I did, and I'm sure you did too, was anticipate green light to just go hard again. And here's where our conversation is really going to take off, because that translates into our lives now as adults, right? Red light, green light. And I started really taking a look at it in 2015. And I'm sure you can relate, but I went from high school straight into serious jobs, full-time jobs, straight into a 20-year career into the Army, and then right out of that into another full-time career in instructing ROTC for 4 years, and then straight out of that into a contractual agreement with a government contractor on a part-time basis. And the part-time basis came as a result of the epiphany that happened in 2015, which was I realized, like you, that I was stuck in green light. And I had to do something about that. I had to do something about it. And basically the thing I did was I did more red light. And there are two things that I noticed that I want to get into eventually or shortly and talk about in depth. And that was just physical exhaustion and emotional drain. And that started to come in the latter years of my Army career, where I was just physically exhausted. And even so, I still didn't stop. Like I just said, I went out of that into something else and something else. And again, relatable, I'm sure. But there were several things under that physical exhaustion that were scary to me. And that was just always feeling drained. And I was talking to a loved one about it, and she's also concerned about it because despite resting and getting sufficient sleep and sufficient time off her feet, she still just feels drained all the time. And she had some medical workup done for it, and they came back negative, as in your body biologically is okay. And I think we laughed and both agreed that then it must just be burnout. Simple burnout. Because she has gone from school to school to school to school to school, and then some, while having a full-time job. And these schools are military schools that require a lot of your time and a lot of focus, especially at the level at which these schools are. And that I could relate, because that's what I started feeling, was just no matter how much I got rest. And I don't do very well with sleep, and we'll talk about sleep here in a second. But I already don't do well sleeping. And with the little I got, I was just like, I am not getting any rest at all. I'm just always drained. And then that drain leads to our sleep regulation, or a lack thereof, where, again, some of us might be getting sufficient sleep but aren't rested, and some of us might not be getting any sleep, and the cycle just continues because the drainage continues, and the loss of sleep just exacerbates that. And sleep, they say, is important. I mean, I think at this point we would agree, some of us, that 8 hours is prime. That's what the pros want us to have. But let's just be honest. Come on in closer and let me tell you this. Some of us just don't have 8 hours to dedicate to sleep. So realistically, 8 is what they recommend. But if you're getting sufficient sleep, or I should say, if you're not getting any at all, and I don't mean to make light of it, but if you're not getting 8, you should be trying really hard to get no less than 4 good solid hours of sleep, because it's important. Your decisions that you make, especially if you are in leadership positions, or you're a parent, or I mean, just think about it. You work around heavy machinery and moving pieces and parts where people can get seriously hurt or worse. You need to have your cognitive full range of thinking going, and sleep gives us that. I was going to say they say, but again, by now we all know that it does. It gives us the reset button, and going all the time is just not healthy. It is not sustainable at all. Not to mention the body aches and headaches that comes with the two we just discussed, or the lack of the two we just discussed, or rectifying the two we just discussed. And they're not accidental. Some of them, I am sure, are self-inflicted wounds, such as not being hydrated enough, probably not eating a balanced diet, and all that good jazz. But I would go out on a limb and say that the majority of the reasons we get these body aches and pains, if they're not already pre-existing medical conditions, is that we are just lacking in good sleep and overall rest. But some of these are self-inflicted wounds. Like I said, not hydrating enough, not resting enough, loss of sleep. Those are the self-inflicted wounds, because the pre-existing biological ones, they're out of your control, or out of our control at some point. But I mean, I seriously took stock of that, because that constant chase, and interestingly enough, when you make the decision to not live in that fast-paced world anymore, where you're on the go and on the chase, and I use chase delicately because the point is you will start to get pushback from friends and loved ones when you start doing more red light. And you shake your head and say, Warren, really? And yes, because people start to put it in different context. Either you think you're better than they are because you have done some homework and you can choose to do more red lights than green lights, and others just think that you are not ambitious enough and motivated enough and ask questions like, if you're healthy and can, why don't you? And my response to especially that last one is because I just want to live a little happier and a little healthier and a little less on the go and more trying to find just some peace and quiet by doing the things that we'll talk about here shortly. But you'll get pushback. You'll get pushback. And it surprised me when it happened, but there is that. But at the end of the day, it is your sanity that matters and your health that matters. And, I look at it this way, and it sounds a little just cliche and simplistic, but if they're your true friends and your loved ones that truly do love you and understand you, they'll either come around, or if they don't, then they kind of washed themselves out and proved you wrong, which is a little sad, but, at the end of the day, it's okay. It really is. And then that brings me to the emotional drain. And this one, folks, they're both risky and dangerous if not dealt with properly. But the emotional drain, I think, is probably the most dangerous of the two. And that is because you start getting these weird mood swings, things that I'll use myself again as an example. I am at heart a very low-key person. I have my moments when I can act the fool like everybody else. And when I was in uniform and lives were on the line, very serious person then, and even a little after that. But for the most part, I'm pretty low-key and not much triggers me until about the last 5 years of my military career. Everything, it seemed, everything triggered me, and I would just go into these weird mood swings, and that bothered me because it wasn't me. And oh, by the way, some of my soldiers noticed because they mentioned it. And that's scary when other people start seeing it too. So no, those mood swings just started bothering me, and with the mood swings came the second one, these crazy irritable moments where just about everything was a trigger. I can't even think of something that wasn't. Like, everything was a trigger. And the secret or the underlying part or issue with that is that the surface issue triggers, for example, a soldier was running a couple minutes late for formation, right? It's still an infraction. It's still wrong. It still lacks discipline, all that good jazz. But it's a couple minutes. And I started finding where I would just lose my shit for those simple, irritable infractions, or I was getting irritable from these small infractions, and it begged the question, at least to me and for me, like, what the F? What is going on, dude? Like, this isn't you. And so, yeah, when you start getting irritable and you can't explain why, or the things that are doing it normally wouldn't, there is a problem. It is a signal. That is the universe signaling to you that check yourself because something is wrong. Maybe you ought to just red light for a minute. And then with that irritability came a lack of drive, which in part, in all honesty, was part of why I retired. It wasn't the only reason, as in retired from the Army, from uniform. It was one of the decisions because, oh, by the way, folks, if you're still watching, you're rock stars and you know I appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by and giving me a listening ear. But I realized that with the irritability, I just wasn't motivated to do the things that I used to love doing, which was soldiering. And along with the lack of motivation came a little lack of drive, and I started questioning again. That is, our metacognition, question why we question. So again, I started questioning that, like, why are you lacking motivation? And oh, by the way, come on and let me tell you this one too. Age plays a role in that part. So there was that with slowing down physically because of aging. But it was more than that. There was just this noticeable, and I think that was the key. There was a noticeable lack of drive and motivation. And I didn't want to become an obstacle in the military and be a hypocrite. And the things I used to get on my soldiers about doing, that drive, that motivation, to then not have that anymore. So I saw myself becoming an obstacle, and I always talk about removing obstacles out of your way. So pretty much I removed myself from the environment. I don't want to call it an obstacle. I removed myself from the environment because I know that it wasn't the environment that needed to change. It was me that needed to change. And so, yeah, I removed myself. But all of what I just shared with you, I started to discover the last 5 years of being in uniform, and then up until 2015 when I really just had an epiphany, like, dude, you're not a kid that loved the game red light, green light. It is, you need to do a lot more red light. And look, folks, I know I speak from a position of being fortunate. I know that. I realize that. And I count my blessings and being fortunate every day. But I'm speaking primarily to those of us who are getting ready to make that transition, right? And you're questioning yourself, should you or can you? If you've done your homework, and I am talking about financially and in other ways, but if you've done your homework and you and your significant other sit down and talk about it and realize that we can live comfortably and do the things that we do like occasionally with X amount, then what is the rest of it for? Because at the end of the day, you are truly just taking time from your overall mental health. You're just robbing yourself of time from your own mental health. And I use the game as the metaphor for a discussion, but in getting around to wrapping up, I want to use another game metaphorically for helping us with, doing more red lights. And that is, instead of red light, green light, just do a jigsaw puzzle with a loved one, a friend. Play Scrabble on a board, not digitally. And that connection and that interaction will help with the irritability, the mood swings, the lack of motivation, because now you're doing something again. You're creating, right? You're thinking, you're exercising your little gray cells, like Hercule Poirot reminds us to do, right? You're exercising your little gray cells by doing something that doesn't require you to green light. It just requires a little bit of critical thinking right there on the sofa. And now don't go, ooh, Warren is saying hang out on the sofa and not get outside and get exercise. Not what I'm saying. I'm saying there needs to be a balance. And oh, by the way, these games can go outside if the weather permits. So there is the answer to your challenge. But no, it's do something that is not green light focused, or if it's even green light, it is not that wide open when you were a kid green light, because you just want to get as much in as possible, and stop seeing the red light as boring or as in anticipation for green light. So I started by asking, what was one of your favorite games? And not to sound cheesy, but life isn't a game. And so many of us are out here in YouTube land doing podcasts and shows on sharing these things, and it's worth it. It's worth it. It's a full field, but the ones that are reputable, it's worth it, because I often tell people, sometimes you think that people that should know better, we assume that some people that should know better, because we put them in these categories, often just don't know. They're the ones that truly don't know and needs the help more so than anyone else. So even though there's so many out there, I think each one can reach one. And so with that said, red light. And just, think about it. Take it seriously. Think about it. Again, I speak from a position of being fortunate. Not all of us can have the luxury of doing a lot of red lights. I totally understand and I totally get it. But it is also a crutch. It is also a crutch not finding time for red lights, because we can use chasing green lights so much of an excuse. Again, because of our environment and what we have been taught is what is needed and what is necessary. But just understand that putting more red lights into your life is not cheating. It is not taking a knee and facing out and drinking water and pulling security like we say in the military. It's not being a slacker. It's responsible. It's self-care. All right? So a little bit more red light. And until our next conversation, be good out there. Be good out there. Take care of yourselves, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for stopping by.